This is 9/11 Freefall.
Good evening, everybody. This is Andy Steele, your host. Thank you again for tuning in this Thursday night, and I'm honored to play my most recent interview. This one is with Wayne Madsen, investigative journalist, and I'm sure many members of the audience have already heard of this person before. And he was one of the speakers at AE 9/11 Truth Symposium that took place a few days after the 13th anniversary of the attacks, just not too a week or two ago. And in this interview, we talk about a lot of things. He talks about the media in general. You know, we always run into that big media wall. And even though the case is proven for controlled demolition of the 3 World Trade Center buildings that we talk about all the time on this show, there's something's going on there. Something's going on behind the scenes. Well, he talks about what's happening behind the scenes, and he talks about Operation Mockingbird, something that if you haven't heard about it before, then you're going to want to listen tonight and learn more about it. And we're going to cover the subject in even greater depth in future episodes. So this is just the beginning of that. So I'll be playing that for you in just a few minutes. He also talks about his own research into complicity, too, of other governments, potential complicity, which is not a topic we normally get into on this show because we try to stick to the science, but I know there's an interest in that. I don't discourage people from looking into it at all, so you're going to get some of that tonight, too. Before I play the interview with Wayne Madsen, I just want to give a shout out to a very special activist and very talented person out there, Mr. Andy Ingersoll. Now, you probably noticed from the beginning of the show, if you're a regular listener, that we have new theme music, and that theme music was created by Mr. Ingersoll. He's a member of San Diegans for 9/11 Truth. He contacted me last week and said he had done some writing and some composing and wanted me to listen to some new music based off of the old theme music. And I did, and I made it the new theme music, as you heard, and it's really good. I like it. It sounds like an action movie, like an action movie from the 80s, like a John Carpenter film. I really like it, and I think it's appropriate, because even though we're not diving away from explosions or jumping onto the roofs of cars, I do think of 9/11 Truth, the people in it, the people doing what they can to inform the masses about the crime of the century. I think of those people as the modern-day action heroes. So it's very appropriate, and I want to thank Mr. Ingersoll for his contribution to this program. Good job. All right, we're going to do what we do every week. We're going to take 10 seconds of silence to remember the victims of 9/11 and their families, and all the people who died in the wars that followed 9/11. We'll do that starting now. And that is 10 seconds. Wayne Madsen is an investigative journalist, an author, and a columnist specializing in intelligence and international affairs. He's the author of the site The Wayne Madsen Report, and he's been a U.S. naval officer. He worked at the NSA and the Department of State, among other places. He was also one of the speakers at AE 9/11 Truth Symposium this year on the anniversary in New York, or maybe a few days after the anniversary. Mr. Madsen, welcome to 9/11 Freefall.
Hi, good to be with you.
I thank you for coming on the program. I know we're going to have a lot of listeners, a lot of fans of you out there, and rightfully they should be, because you've done a lot of great work. I've been following your work for years when I've written for other sites, and I've based some articles I've written off of your excellent reporting, so thank you for what you do. Now, I went over your background very briefly. I'm going to ask you to elaborate on that for our audience. You know, you worked at the NSA and the Department of State. What did you do at those agencies?
Well, I basically got my start in the Navy in anti-submarine warfare, but then I migrated over to a very new discipline, and the Navy and other federal agencies were really trying to impress the government on back in the early 80s, and that was the computer security and communication security area. So that's what I did in the Navy for my latter part of the time in the Navy at NSA, where I was transferred by the Navy to NSA headquarters in Fort Meade, Maryland. I also did information system security for the Department of State, specifically in the Bureau of Diplomatic Security, and then I continued to do that for various contractors for a few years, but I slowly migrated into journalism, which is what I planned to do in the early 70s, but this nasty little war called Vietnam came along, and Nixon got rid of the college draft deferment, so I wound up going into the Navy, and my journalism career wasn't aborted, but it was postponed for several years.
Well, I think it's probably because you needed to get some of the experience. I sometimes believe in a higher force that helps guide us, and maybe you needed to have some of the experiences that you had to lead you to being the kind of journalist that you are now, the kind of journalist we need more of, and maybe it kept you from being the kind of journalist that we see on TV today, if you want to call them journalists.
Well, yeah, I mean, actually, had I gone into journalism school right away, I probably would have wound up in a newspaper in my home state or a neighboring state. That would have been probably the Trenton Times, the Newark Star-Ledger, or the Camden Courier Post, maybe even the Philadelphia Inquirer or the New York papers. But even those journalists, and I know many who started out in the print world, and they're unfortunately, some of them are no longer with us, but journalism has changed. The real journalists have been supplanted by these talking heads, these pundits. They're basically politicians. People like Chris Matthews. He used to be he was basically a political aide for Tip O'Neill. Not a journalist. None of these guys are journalists. Anderson Cooper. His mother, Gloria Vanderbilt, he complains how tough it was for him to break into the television news business when his mother was one of the wealthiest heiresses in the nation's history, and he also did a short time as an intern at the CIA. So, I mean, in his case, he volunteered for that. I mean, it wasn't that he was in the military; he got assigned to the CIA, as I did with the NSA. So. These people, I think, are just, they don't have any, I don't think they have any connection to real-world journalism at all. They have a connection to real-world infotainment and all this corporatization in news media.
Well, it's about crafting a reality. That's what I see presented to me on television. It's not so much about helping the public. It's about handling the public. That's the way that I see their job as being now.
Yeah, psychological pressure to try to sway public opinion. This is what they do, and most of the news they cover is just sensationalism. It's not that they don't do the backstory. They don't do any true other journalism. Most of these major networks have really emaciated their investigative departments, news departments, as have many newspapers. Those newspapers that are left, many have actually gone out of business.
Now, I want to talk more about Anderson Cooper in just a few moments here, but to begin with, I want to ask you, I always ask my guests this, obviously you're awake to the truth of 9/11. How did you come awake to the truth of 9/11 and the controlled demolition of the towers?
Well, on that particular day, I was on my way to work in downtown D.C. I lived in Arlington, Virginia. Of course, right before I left for work, the first plane had hit, and then as I was getting ready to leave, of course, I was late for work because I stayed to listen to the reports or watch the reports on TV about the second plane. And then I was in transit when the buildings actually collapsed. I mean, like everybody else, everyone was shocked. I mean, but I think it must have been about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and of course that was before Building 7 collapsed. I started to, have real suspicions about how this managed to have happened, because what I saw occur flew in the face of everything that I had been trained to do when I was in the Navy in the 1980s, stationed in Washington, D.C. All the contingency planning and continuity of operations planning and continuity of government planning seem to have just been tossed out the window. I mean, keep in mind that in the 1980s, during the Reagan administration, the federal government had plans to survive a surprise Soviet nuclear attack, and the window of opportunity was about 18 minutes, and that was from the time the missile doors were detected opening on a Soviet ballistic missile or cruise missile submarine somewhere used to sit off of Bermuda. There was about an 18-minute window until Washington was, vaporized, basically. And there were plans to mitigate that, get the president out of Washington. And on the Air Force One, there were plans to get a lot of the, not all of them, but a lot of the government officials, military officials out of Washington. And all that seemed to have collapsed on the morning of 9/11. And, when I started looking at it even further, it just didn't add up. And it was quite clear that this whole thing occurred because of culpability of people inside the government. And it wasn't just because of the fact that they were, incompetent, as some people suggest, that all these things happened because people didn't do their job. Keep in mind that in the 1980s, President Reagan was successfully exfiltrated from Washington, D.C. within that 18-minute window. He was in the air during a drill that he participated in personally. And if that happened in the 1980s, what happened in 2001?
That's absolutely right. It seems like our entire air defense is just melted down, or that's what they would want you to believe. I don't really believe that the good men and women who are just doing their job within our Strategic Air Command are that incompetent, personally, either. If you were before Congress right now, let's say we had a new investigation tomorrow, and you had to be rushed to Washington, D.C. to give your expert testimony on all these matters, what would you consider to be the strongest evidence that our elected officials and law enforcement people should be looking at and pursuing in prosecuting 9/11?
Well, I mean, I'll leave it to the experts on the actual, physics involved with the demolitions, the free fall and whatnot. And I know that architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth seems to be the premier organization of all the various organizations, because they've got, I think close to 2,000 experts in every discipline imaginable. But I have looked more at the smoking gun evidence on the law enforcement, what the intelligence community knew before 9/11 about this particular attack. And that's where I would feel stronger in providing, a committee. And actually, a few years ago, I believe it might have been in 2004, former Representative Cynthia McKinney did hold sort of a non-official hearing that I actually participated in as a questioner. I was one of 3 questioners myself, Ray McGovern and the late Michael Rupert. And so I did actually have that opportunity. But I would ask, people, and believe me, so many people in the government have come forward to me over the years to tell me about what they knew and how information they had was suppressed. But I would concentrate on what is obviously in those redacted 28 pages in the Senate Intelligence Committee joint report on 9/11 intelligence failures, which the Bush administration and the Obama administration have refused to reveal. That will show the absolute culpability of Saudi Arabia. Their ambassador here in the U.S. in Washington at the time, Prince Bandar, who was obviously a very good close friend of the Bush family, so he's known as Bandar Bush, but also information that came to me from multiple sources, that from the Justice Department, from journalists who cover justice who were not allowed by their news organizations to pursue the leads, and that was on what a large group of Israelis were doing about a year before 9/11, and this group consisted of traveling so-called art students. These art students were aggressively trying to penetrate the security of various government facilities, military bases, even private homes of government employees, including federal judges. And they said that they were students at Bellelel Art Academy and the University of Jerusalem Art Academy. In the University of Jerusalem Art Academy, there is no such thing. I mean, obviously it was a Mossad operation. And then there were the movers and the office and the home furnishing movers. One of the companies was called Urban Moving Systems. There were 5 individuals arrested on September 11th, 2001, at around 3 o'clock in the afternoon. They were arrested in East Rutherford, New Jersey, on New Jersey Highway 3, which is also known as Patterson Plank Road, which goes from basically Secaucus and East Rutherford, and East Rutherford is where the Giant Stadium is. They were heading towards the Lincoln Tunnel, and that route had been closed. There was no traffic allowed into Manhattan that afternoon. Traffic was allowed out, but nothing was allowed in. And one enterprising East Rutherford, New Jersey police officer noticed this white van heading towards the Lincoln Tunnel, stopped it, 5 Israelis in there, matched the description of 5 Israelis seen that morning before the first plane hit the North Tower, that were at Liberty State Park in Jersey City, wearing Arab clothing, taking photographs with a video camera, taking video and photographs of the North Tower as the first plane hit. And some of them were also seen with holding lighters, and sort of like they do at concerts, kind of shaking the lit lighter back and forth. And many witnesses saw this, and they were arrested. The Bergen County bomb squad was brought in. The dog team was brought in. The dogs tested positively for explosives in that van. In the van was found Arab clothing. In the van was found multiple passports, several $1,000s in cash. And when asked by the police what they were doing, they said, "We're not your problem, the Palestinians are your problem." So this was clearly an attempt by these Israelis who knew about 9/11 before it happened to try to pin this attack on the Palestinians. Well, there were no Palestinians involved among the 19 hijackers. The 15 of them were Saudi nationals, and there was one Egyptian and a couple from Yemen. So that's some people say that's just a conspiracy theory. Well, there are criminal conspiracies. Obviously, 5 Israelis were involved, and that's a criminal conspiracy. And when the FBI later went to their warehouse in Weehawken, New Jersey, to interview their boss, a guy named Dominic Suter, whose name appeared on this list of suspects that was leaked by 2 financial control authorities. It was classified. It was distributed around the world by the FBI. It was somehow leaked by a financial control authority in Finland and one in Italy. And lo and behold, whose name is on the list along with Muhammad Atta and all the hijackers, but Dominic Suter and his wife, Amrit Suter. And Suter was asked by the FBI to remain around for questioning later. Obviously, that was a bad decision, or maybe it was set up in advance because Suter fled the United States, was not around for further questioning. When the FBI went into the warehouse, the Urban Moving System warehouse in Weehawken, New Jersey, they found blasting caps, they found pipes, they found fuel oil, they found fertilizer, and all of a sudden the entire neighborhood got taped off with yellow tape. The local police were told by the FBI, listen, we've got this covered, you keep out of it, because all of a sudden guys with these hazmat suits descended on the Urban Moving System warehouse because they had detected anthrax inside the warehouse.
And this is not a conspiracy theory. This is the first time we've covered this part of 9/11 on this program, but this is all stuff that actually did take place. And obviously you talked to a lot of people. It sounds like you talked to elected officials, you talked to people inside government. Without giving any names or ruining any of your sources, what's the general reaction when you're in private with these people when you discuss this? I mean, is it kind of like they know? Do they act surprised or what?
No, they know, but because of the sensitivity, especially when you're discussing Israeli foreknowledge of 9/11, because of the religious aspects and whatnot, I'll just give you one example. While I spent a month in New York and New Jersey investigating not only this angle but also the Saudi and United Arab Emirates angle to financing the hijackers and Al Qaeda, and I think again the links between Al Qaeda and what happened on 9/11 are tenuous at best, and I think Robert Mueller, the FBI director, was correct when he said, look, we don't have any evidence connecting bin Laden to these attacks. But there was Arab nation involvement in the attack, and that was centered on the governments of Saudi Arabia and Dubai, which is one of the constituents of the United Arab Emirates. So in one case, a high-ranking New Jersey law enforcement official, I'm sitting in his office, he said, look, do me a courtesy when you're finished talking to people, including members of the police department and whatnot here, could you give me an outbrief? And that's something I agreed to do because it's a courtesy, especially when law enforcement may not be officially helping him, but he definitely made some people available to me. And when I did the outbrief, I told him about everything I discovered, especially about the Urban Moving Systems situation with Weehawken, and I said, it looks like we've got a Mossad connection to 9/11, and he just leaned back in his chair and smiled, and he said, I think it's always I think you always should have a healthy dose of skepticism anytime you encounter people who are with Mossad. And it was quite clear that he already had known a lot of this, and I took it as sort of confirmation. But as far as him getting involved with prosecuting, no, because what happened to those 5 Israeli nationals is they were put in the Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn for 5 months. Their custody was so secure that an attempt by a rabbi to bring them a Bible was nixed by the U.S. government because they were afraid there would be coded messages. And I got this from their defense attorney. I didn't get this from law enforcement. This was their defense attorneys told me this. And but after repeated phone calls by then Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Olmert to Mayor Giuliani, they were released. And then later they had the audacity to go on Israeli television. Some of them did, not all of them. And they said they were there. One of them said, we were there to document the event, which I found to be a highly suspicious comment because they had been physically at Liberty State Park before the first plane hit, which meant they knew about it beforehand. I would suggest even more that the government of Israel was involved with it, along with the key members of the Saudi government. And people say, well, aren't Saudi Arabia and Israel bitter enemies? No, they're not. They haven't been. They have worked together for decades. The relationship between the Zionists and the Saudis go back to after World War I, when the first modern Saudi king, Ibn Saud, met with Chaim Weizmann, the head of the Zionist International Zionist Organization. Basically, Ibn Saud said, we have no problem with you establishing a Jewish homeland in Palestine. So that's how long the relationship goes back.
Now, during the symposium last weekend, during his introduction of you, Les Jameson said that you have an understanding of how government operates. Now, that's a pretty broad blanket statement. I think we're getting an idea from what you've shared so far on how government operates, but I'm going to ask you just to summarize for our audience and for any future generations who might come upon this broadcast, just how government operates when it comes to the issues that you cover. How would you sum it up?
Well, this is what the government. I'll tell you what government excels at. This is going to sound cynical, but I've seen this happen so many times personally. When the government screws up, they are very good at covering up, and we've seen this time in and time out. And what the normal government reaction for a major screw up, or whether it's by accident or by on purpose, is to appoint a commission, a blue ribbon panel. And nothing will obfuscate an investigation more than an official panel. How many have we seen? How many of these reports have we seen where they never got to the essence of these, well, for lack of a better term, criminal conspiracies? We certainly know that happened with the Kennedy assassination. We know it happened with Iran-Contra, with the Tower report. We saw it happen with the abuses of the CIA and FBI and NSA back in the 60s, early 70s with the Rockefeller Commission report, and then we saw it, of course, most recently with the 9/11 Commission report. What's odd about the 9/11 Commission report are the two co-chairs later said they were lied to, they weren't happy with the report, and that's Governor Kane, Tom Kane of New Jersey, and Congressman Lee Hamilton, former chairman of the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence. And that I thought was absolutely incredible, that you had these two individuals who put their signatures on the 9/11 Commission report that later said it's really not worth the paper it's printed on.
Well, a week before this program airs, there's a clip of somebody asking Lee Hamilton on C-SPAN's Washington Journal about Building 7, and he says the debate still continues. What amazes me about how these people perceive the issue of what happened to Building 7, for instance, the issue we always talk about, is how casual they are about it. Like, oh, it might have been fire and it might have been explosives, but that's going to be up for history to decide. It's not our problem. I mean, it makes a big difference what the cause was, and it seems that for something that you're going to put your name on, you want to get it right. If everything is on the up and up, but I mean, people call it the 9/11 Omission Commission, and the family members, a lot of them weren't happy with it, and the fact that nobody.
Of course not. Right. Yeah, and they shouldn't be, because if you read the report, it talks about everything except what happened on 9/11. I mean, I know what was in that report. You know, the report is really, most of it is a series of recommendations, which really gave us this form of government we have today, the surveillance society, creating this Homeland Security Department. And, but all those recommendations were in the Justice Department. They were on their wish list for a decade or more before 9/11. I know because I worked for a public advocacy group. We were fighting the Clinton administration on trying to get some of these measures implemented, and we knew that if the Justice Department was able to have whatever they wanted, it was what was in the 9/11 Commission report as far as recommendations.
Well, it seems like after 9/11, this big metaphorical satanic Santa Claus came up out of the dust, and every agency in the U.S. government, even loosely tied to security, came running with their wish lists to get whatever they wanted. They were looking for some kind of event to justify getting all these goodies from the American taxpayer. Now, I want to move to news, because we talked about it earlier. You said Anderson Cooper interned at the CIA, and I want to elaborate on it. How significant is that when it comes to his reporting? I mean, is there any evidence that this has influenced his reporting now? I mean, beyond just that he interned there and now he's a reporter and it's kind of weird. Is there any evidence suggesting that he's like still working for them?
Oh, I mean, there are literally hundreds of reporters over the years since the beginning of the CIA in 1947 who have been associated with the agency. This was all part of the Mighty Wurlitzer by Frank Wisner and others who created this operation to influence the media. At one point in time, it was believed that the New York Times had 10 CIA people on their reporting staff, and that the Washington Post equaled them. They had 10. And other major organizations had agency people, agents of influence, if not outright agents, working for them. So that's no big surprise. I mean, you look at the, and I'm not just, picking on Anderson Cooper, his colleague, Wolf Blitzer. I mean, one could argue whether he's really a legitimate journalist, since he got his start as the public affairs spokesman for the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, AIPAC. But he never discusses that when he is involved in covering things up. Another individual who actually, John Miller, who was an ABC special investigative reporter, investigated the Israelis that were arrested on 9/11 in New York for 2020. The anchor was Barbara Walters, and he said, well, while they may have had some knowledge, there's nothing that suggests they would have known about it, and it was a complete cover-up. John Miller then went on to become the public affairs spokesman for the FBI under Mueller, and then he turns up as a special investigative reporter for CBS News, and now he is heading up an intelligence division in the New York Police Department. So I would strongly suggest that Mr. Miller is not a journalist. He's an intelligence agent who managed to penetrate ABC News and CBS News.
And I just want to point out to our audience that this is important, because the topic we cover most of the time is about the scientific evidence of the Twin Towers and Building 7's destruction. It's important because part of our mission also is to get the word out, to be activists. And one of the biggest walls we run into, of course, is the media. It seems that when the science stands on its own 2 feet and the case is proven, as it has been here, that you should be able to get it into the hands of a legitimate reporter, and it'll be blasted all over the front pages of every newspaper in the country. That's the fantasy. That's what happens at the end of fiction movies about that stuff. But the real world is, of course, much different. And we're getting an insight now into why that wall exists, how that wall is constructed to keep information like this out of the minds of the American public, and why we have to agitate to get any kind of progress in this realm. Now, I want you to talk about Operation Mockingbird. I'm actually working on getting somebody who was involved in this on the program later as a little note to the audience there. But explain to our audience right now what is Operation Mockingbird, and how does it work from your research?
Well, Mockingbird is actually what I sort of already described. It was an effort to influence news reporting, and it extended throughout the news print journalism, newspapers and magazines, major newspapers, New York Times, Washington Post, and the big magazines at the time. Now they pretty much have gone under, but in those days it was the Saturday Evening Post and Life and Look and Time and Newsweek, U.S. News and World Report. all were part of this agency operation to basically steer coverage in certain directions. It also extended into radio and then into television. And I would suggest now, because the old media has now been transformed to this new social media, that we see it also influencing information on Facebook, Twitter. I believe Wikipedia is nothing more than an intelligence operation that is basically serving the purpose of the old great Soviet encyclopedia. Now, one could probably go to Wikipedia and feel assured that what they tell you about the periodic table of elements is correct. But when it gets into anything political, you're on very thin ice with Wikipedia, and I believe that Wikipedia is yet another operation that can be used, of course, to destroy careers, to taint the history of 9/11, which we know it does, and so this is the new Mockingbird because the media has changed so much.
Well, that reminds me of my service in the Peace Corps in Uzbekistan, when you would turn on the television and the only because it was a dictatorship, and the only safe topic that they could talk about was the weather for the day, and then it would be a woman dancing on television. I want to know for our audience, because I always try to understand the nitty-gritty of how things work. From your research, how do you get an asset, or how do you, first of all, obviously I would assume you get an asset into a TV station or a newspaper, somebody there that's willing to toe the government's line on certain issues.
Yeah.
How do you get somebody to do that? How do they approach them? Are these people trained by the CIA, or do they just approach dupes and people who want to be famous who are already reporting?
It used to be that, like as you suggest, they actually put assets in the newspapers and magazines and the broadcasters, but I think it's a lot more nuanced now. Because remember, originally with Mockingbird, it was during the Cold War, so none of this would have taken place without the knowledge of the owners of the media, and whether that was General David Sarnoff, who headed up RCA, which owned NBC, or Bill Paley, who headed up CBS. Or Leonard Goldenson, who headed up ABC, and Henry Luce, the Time Life tycoon. Yeah, they would have all known about it, but it was all in the interest of fighting communism, so everybody was on the same page, more or less. We can argue whether it was legitimate journalism to do that, but that's we had this Cold War mentality during this era we're talking about. Today, it's not the Cold War, of course, but it's this so-called global war on terrorism. So how they infiltrate these people in, you see it every time you turn on the television now with all this business with ISIL and ISIS. They get these commentators, many of them retired generals and other military officers. They get these think tank wonks who eventually become pundits. They become regular contributors from places like the Heritage Foundation and the Foundation for the Defense of Democracy. These are all neoconservative operations, but not just the neocons. You get them through the Brookings Institute, which basically reflects the officialdom in Washington, D.C., Center for Strategic and International Studies, which is basically a Henry Kissinger operation. So that's how they're infiltrated today. They're not infiltrated through the back door with a kind of a wink and a nod from the corporate leadership. They come right in through the front door.
Well, I think that's very important for people to seize on, and I try to understand how people think when I hear about things like Operation Mockingbird, because I've heard it quoted. I mean, nobody wakes up in the morning and says, "I want to do evil." Usually, people do things, even if it's the wrong thing. They think they're doing the right thing, and it seems to make sense to me that you could get a lot of people to go along with something like this, saying, "Well, we're fighting communism. You don't want the Reds to take over the world, right?" And so they go along with it, and the infrastructure gets put in place, and then the Berlin Wall falls down, Soviet Union falls apart. But now it's ingrained. Now it's just part of the way we do things, and nobody really questions it, and it continues on to the new, after post 9/11 war on terror, and nobody really blinks or thinks twice about it because they're just used to it being this way.
And it's even more insidious because we talk about globalization of the economy, of finance and whatnot, and manufacturing, but we've also seen globalization of the media. I mean, today we have a guy, Fareed Zakaria, who I believe is born in India, who is basically looked upon as as some sort of guru on every subject, and I would challenge Mr. Zakaria any day of the week to explain to me how the U.S. intelligence community operates. But he seems to be have no problem in offering up his expertise all the time. So we have individuals like him. Christiane Amanpour is another one. Now, she does fancy herself as quite an expert on U.S. Intelligence, political, military affairs. She's from Iran. She's an Iranian Christian married to Jamie Rubin, who was Madeleine Albright's press secretary, both at the UN and at the State Department. So Susan Rice, her national security advisor, married to a Canadian newsman, Ian Cameron. So it's not just through these recruiting efforts to hire these people who I just basically challenge their credentials to report on these things, but it's also nepotism because you see who's married to who and this type of thing. So it's basically, this is a definition of a true oligarchy. So you've not only got the financial connections, but you've got the family connections also.
What I'm interested in, I've always considered doing a report on the White House Correspondents Association, and it's hard to get information on them just through your proper channels like their web page and Google News searches. It seems like you kind of have to call them. Do they control access to the president? I mean, can you get access to the president unless you join this organization?
No. Well, let me tell you what the White House Correspondents Association is a group of White House reporters, and they basically have the hard pass. They cover the White House every day. Some of them go on the pool trips where you might get an MSNBC representing all the television networks on a presidential trip somewhere, and then you get somebody from one of the wire services doing the same thing, and the print for the newspapers and whatnot. So it's changed, and I have been to a couple of the White House correspondents dinners over the years. It used to be journalists. Now you can say, well, they're just White House, but there are other journalists who go to these things, at least to the annual banquet. But that annual banquet has changed over the years. Now it attracts these Hollywood types. And you really can't tell much of a difference, and I have seen this, where they have the red carpet at it's always held at the Hilton, D.C. Hilton, which we somewhat jokingly referred in Washington to as the Hinckley Hilton because it's the Hilton where President Reagan was shot by Hinckley. But they roll out the red carpet, and then they got these people from these Hollywood operations, Access Hollywood, and all these other things, commenting on what people are wearing. These as they walk, these movie stars and whatnot, and it's not. The White House Correspondents Association, I'm afraid, has sold their soul to the Hollywood devil. And I think maybe it's not their fault because let's look at the ownership. ABC is owned by Disney. CBS is owned by a movie entertainment company. NBC was in Time Warner for a long time, and now Comcast. So a lot of the news media has merged with these Hollywood operations, this entertainment industry, and it's something Edward R. Murrow cautioned against even back in the early 60s, when he said he increasingly saw the networks, the broadcast networks at the time, NBC, CBS, and ABC, being influenced too much by the entertainment part of the networks, and to the point where the news divisions were being trumped all the time. Now the news divisions have no say, and then you get pretty boys like Anderson Cooper as an anchor. That's how that happens. That's a decision that not made so much in New York as a decision made in Hollywood.
Well, I'm on their website right now. This is why I'm so interested in it, because it says in 1913, President Wilson threatened to do away with presidential news conferences after complaining that certain evening newspapers quoted remarks he considered off the record. Now, that was a rumor that was put out, if you study it deeply. And then it says they founded this organization to agreed on a code of professional conduct and convinced the president to relent for the time being anyway. And then there was another flat. But basically, that's the story they put out. And, I mean, so far as I know, that's what happened, but I haven't researched it deeply. But I'm just curious. It seems like they've consolidated the ability to get to the president, to be able to ask him questions.
You're absolutely right. You make a deal when you get that White House press pass. It's called a hard pass because it's you can get a temporary, which is good for a day. I don't know what good that does anyone, because very rarely will they call on a person with a temporary press pass, calling them to ask a question. Forget about it. It's the president there, but even the press secretary won't usually call on you if you've only got a temporary pass. That's reserved for the hard pass. And I knew, long time White House correspondent Helen Thomas, who died not too long ago. She lost her hard pass because she asked some very tough questions, and of course, then she got ambushed by some propagandists for Israel. On the White House grounds. But what happens is the White House press office, which consists of the press secretary and the deputy press secretary and a bunch of others, will basically put pressure on the reporters on what questions to ask. And if you ask a question that's not according to the weekly script, you may lose your hard pass. I know reporters who have lost their hard pass, and what happens if you lose that hard pass, you lose your job because you've lost your access. They're getting paid because they're covering the White House, but are they reporting anything out of the White House? Not really. It's gossip. Just think of the White House press office where these reporters sit in the White House. They're all crowded. They can hear each other's phone conversations. They can probably read each other's computer screens. So there's no such thing as an exclusive scoop. It's really a club, and you're not going to get any news out of an environment like that. Gone are the days when Dan Rather would stand up and really irritate the president, as he did with Richard Nixon. Those days are long gone. The White House press pool is now nothing more than a group of stenographers and psychopaths.
Well, and I just want to clarify now, they issue these to the big news organizations. So, for instance, let's say I work for ABC News. They might say, okay, Andy, you can, we're going to give you our access as a representative of ABC News to be in the White House press corps each day, and you're part of the White House Correspondents Association. I think you have to be to do this. And
it's a dues-paying organization. You pay all. It's open to the White House reporters, and you pay dues. But it's It used to. I know people who used to head up the White House Correspondents Association. I have no criticism of them. They were real reporters, but like I say, this is going back 20 years. This whole environment has changed now. But I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, no, and so I was saying that if I'm working for ABC News and I get ABC News' access to President Obama, and then I raise my hand and say, a group of architects and engineers have found out that hard evidence that explosives brought down World Trade Center 7. What do you think about that? And the president stumbles and stutters, as I guess he would. I would assume, and you can verify this for me, but that somebody at the White House would contact my boss at ABC and say, why is your guy asking me these kinds of questions, and then threaten ABC News' access to the president, which is pretty important, and then I'd be gone and replaced by somebody who's happy to ask the propaganda questions.
Absolutely, that's how it would happen. The president would actually go to his press secretary and say, I was ambushed. He would say, I don't feel comfortable in this. The press secretary in turn, or the deputy president, probably the press secretary, would then call somebody at ABC News or even the ABC Disney. I mean, they could go even to the corporate level. And, the reporter who embarrassed the president or made the president feel uncomfortable would be gone. And without much fanfare, it would just, if the person was under contract, they would buy out the rest of the contract, and then the person might surface somewhere else, but probably the word would be out to the other media organizations that this person's a hot potato, and they probably would not get a job. And that's how it works. That's the dirty little secret of Washington. Has it been that way in the past? Not to this degree. This is really a dirty pool they're playing these days. Look, Dan Rather wasn't fired after he embarrassed Nixon. Nixon felt he embarrassed him. He not only was he not fired, he was promoted to CBS News anchor and take over from Walter Cronkite. So quite the opposite back in those days. But today, I know so many people that are no longer working as journalists because they just weren't going along the script, or in most cases it's just because the media, the news media, is contracting every day, and they lose their job because of what every other person in an industry faces is layoffs and downsizing and whatnot. But I do know cases where journalists have been fired because their access was pulled to the White House pool.
Well, I think it's funny. Any other job that you get in America or the world, there's nobody really worrying about embarrassing you. It's just part of your life, and you deal because you have a responsibility. You're expected to perform your job adequately and answer to somebody. But you become the alleged most powerful man in the world, and suddenly he can't be embarrassed. I think it's a sad state, and really shows the kind of people that the presidency attracts. What you have to become a quote unquote leader in America. You alluded to this earlier, but we're going to revisit it. How does the 9/11 truth, how is it important and fit into the context of a current events when it's something that happened 13 years ago?
Well, it's interesting because this is also this next week is the 50th anniversary of the release of the Warren Report on the JFK assassination, and that event is attracting people at two different conferences in the Washington, D.C. area. Now, some of those people have been at this for literally 50 years. And you can imagine some of these people are quite on in years. And, this happens with these incidents where there's so many questions, and people feel that the government, covered up and obfuscated and lied and whatnot. But I think we can look at the JFK researchers and look at what happened to them, and then say to the 9/11 community, look, you don't want to go down some of those paths. Don't make the same mistake. The JFK community was incredibly factionalized. by people who just developed these lines of thought. They said, well, this is it. This is what happened. I believe this. There are no other explanations. And I've seen some of this also in the 9/11 truth the movement. I think we have to be careful. Now, there obviously are people who will infiltrate and put out nonsense information just to derail, and that happened certainly with the Kennedy investigation, and it's happened with the 9/11 Commission. But by and large, I think most people have a contribution. So, and I said this in New York, one of the things that should not happen is for alternative theories to just be cast down, and the person that comes up with them is ridiculed. Now if it's some ridiculous thing like holograms at the World Trade Center, I mean, obviously you can just dismiss that as total nonsense. But but people get caught up in the details. Thermite, mini nukes. I mean, all that has to be looked at. So I wouldn't throw the baby out with the bathwater in those cases. And as I say, this is what happened with the Kennedy research community. People just got off on tangents, and then there was infighting and the development of what I call cargo cults, where people are quite comfortable with their own theory, and they sort of idolize themselves, and that's something that should be avoided.
Now, in our last few minutes, I just want to ask you, and it's a common question I ask people. Obviously, you've been at this a long time. You keep doing it. You're going to keep doing it probably for the rest of your life, I would guess. What gives you hope? What keeps you going? What makes you think that we're going to have some kind of success and keeps you doing what you do?
Well, I always hope that, somebody might one day come forward with that, proverbial smoking gun evidence, the document. I mean, that's too easy an explanation. I know that it would never be in a document, for example. But every day I'm always somewhat surprised. People will come forward, and I have some leads now that I'm pursuing about 9/11. There was, of course, the author Phil Marshall, who was said to have committed murder of his two children and the family dog, and then he killed himself in California. 757, 767 pilot, and had written 2 books about 9/11. Was working on yet a third. I went out and investigated that so-called murder-suicide. I'm quite convinced they were all murdered because of what Marshall was working on, and a family member has indicated to me where he was looking, and I may pick up on that research, which entails going to Arizona, which is what he was looking at, the boneyard where all those civilian military aircraft are stored, parked in the desert for possible future use. And I've got other leads that I'm pursuing. So, yeah, I mean, that's what keeps me going. I keep doing it, until I'm no longer able to, but I think that's going to be a long, long time.
Well, I hope so, too. I hope you keep on doing it for a very long time, and as you do it, you're inspiring many people, including myself. So, I want to thank you for everything you've done and everything I know you're going to do in the years ahead. Wayne Madsen, appreciate having you on 9/11 Freefall.
Good to be with you.
Remember, you can hear this program every Thursday night on No Lies Radio at 10 o'clock Eastern, 7 o'clock Pacific. You can also download MP3s of this show from the Internet Archive by going to 911freefall.com. This is Andy Steele saying have a great week and good luck.